This is the farmhouse where I grew up, where my father grew up, where my grandfather grew up, where my great-grandfather grew up. The main house was built in 1860. We got electricity in 1943 with the Rural Electrification Act. And now what I am doing is I'm removing the majority of the 1960 updates and reverting the era back to somewhere between 1920 and 1950. I'm going to show you each room in the order that I did them years ago. While I am no more of a carpenter or a designer than any member of my family has ever been, I'm doing it to suit me and my tastes. Now that we've got the walls insulated, as you saw in the last chapter, we're going to look at that floor and see what we can do about it. You notice in the center of the wall there, we've got a couple pieces of painter's tape over the electrical hole where the box is going to go. And the cold air was rolling through there. So when we put the boxes in, we're going to have to seal the boxes really well. But anyway, there's the floor. We pulled up one board, and what you see is the silver is the insulation down cellar that was put on the board so that we'd have some kind of floor insulation. However, it doesn't extend where the stone wall is. So there's some concrete patch too by the looks of it that probably my parents put in. But anyway, what we believe is what happened is when the floor settled, the wall didn't move, so therefore we've got to lower the wall a little bit. So this is the first board we took off. We were hoping not to have to take a lot of stuff apart. So there's the second board we took off. And of course, there's the insulation and a little more concrete. And the deeper we get, the worse it's looking. There's a close-up of the concrete, and everything there is going to have to get removed, and we're going to have to lower that level down probably close to 2 inches because we want to put 1 inch rigid in there, and it's about 1 inch high as it is. So quick look down cellar shows the underside. You've got the insulation and then the area where you can see up into the bedroom. Moving farther down, you can see the beams that hold the floor up. And you can see we've lifted up some concrete and some rocks. And we're going to have wheelbarrow after wheelbarrow of debris that has to get out of there to lower that floor. And you can see how we piled it up. We were hoping we weren't going to have to go too far. Little did we know. So in this image, you can see that we've gone all the way down the long wall, pulled up all the rocks, and that section is looking pretty good. Next, we decided we're just going to have to pull up the boards anywhere the stone wall is to address the problem. So we pulled up another board. And these boards don't come up very easy because they were put down with square nails. If you ever work with square nails, they go in easy and they do not come out, especially when they're rusted. Here's another shot. You can see all the room now that's under those boards because we have pulled so much out because the boards were forced out. And then all the way to the corner, we've got that. So we're coming along. And right here, we decided if we're going to lay down a new floor, we've got to get as close to the wall as possible. Well, just about this time, now this is middle to late January of 2021, Ryorby came out with their little tiny 3 3/4 inch plunge saw. And that can get within a 1/2 inch of the wall. So we were going to use just an oscillating saw and go all the way around the room, and it was going to take weeks. This saw cut down to the corner and down the long wall and then back to where we're over the cellar again in about 5 minutes. And that saved us a lot of work. And what we will do is we will reattach the new floor right to the old floor, but that is in a future chapter. So there you can see that we've gone all the way down and removed that last board. Probably if we had to do it again, we should have pulled the wall off and and got the floor out of there, but that would have meant pulling those tongue and groove boards out. And this way, it's going to work. It's a bedroom, not a church. So we decided to, once the rocks are out, we started dumping in crushed stone to provide a nice level surface that is 1 inch below the beams. And then we did that all the way down through, and that was the end of the day. So we covered it up with a painter's tarp to keep the cold air from rolling through. It only minorly did that. It was cold working in there. Then the one beam that had partially come out of its socket, as you can see, it pulled away a little bit. It dried out and shrunk. I attacked it with the plunge saw and then a chisel and got it down to the level of the sill beam, best I could do. And once you've got the stones out of there, then you put in the crushed stone, you lay the hardware cloth down. That's to stop any mice from coming up through, because we did see some mouse trails going through the rubble stone wall. So we just worked our way down, putting the hardware cloth in. And once the hardware cloth was in, then we put our 1 inch Celotex with the aluminum backing in for insulation, because that was the only part of the floor that was not insulated. Then we spray foamed around those boards to make it airtight. And from down below, you can see what it looks like. We ran the hardware cloth far enough in that we will tape that up to the Celotex that's on the ceiling of the cellar. And there's another timber that we had to cut. Only farther back, we had to shave down quite a bit of that. That took quite a while, though that old swamp oak is hard. And right there, you can see one of the big spikes that they used to drive in the timbers. And that little slot at the top, that little plunge saw cut into that, and it didn't hurt the blade, so it must be a pretty darn good blade. So with all that done, and all the Celotex in, and then we put foam all around everything, so the long wall was now done. Then one day when we were working and the wind was blowing out of the north, because this bedroom is on the north side of the house, there was cold air coming between the wall and the sill. So spray foam that, and that will stop that cold air from coming in. And then in the corner, we had to pull out a lot of stuff, so we had to build it up with stone to make kind of a little wall, and then put the crushed stone in. And then we decided we're going to take 3/4 plywood to replace the 1 inch boards. That's going to take a 1/4 inch out of the floor being out of level, plus it's going to be approximately 1/2 inch or better down from the original boards, because we took out the stone and stuff. So that was set in and test fitted. And with that setting in place, we turned our attention to the short wall where the window is and started pulling those short boards off, because they only went to the beam. So we pulled all them off, and that long strip of Celotex, that is the Celotex from the ceiling of the cellar when we sealed the ceiling to keep the heat from coming down through the floor. And here's the stack of those short boards we stacked up, and eventually we got them out of there. And that was the end of that day. So we covered everything up with that painter's tarp again to keep most of the cold air out. Didn't really work. Next day, we start in taking all the loose stone and everything out of there to get that down to where it needs to be. Here's another shot. You can see the Celotex and the plywood on the right, and we've got to get that area to the left to the correct height so that we can do the same thing as we did on the right. And the big boulders that we had to take out of there, we opened up the window and just threw them out in the snow. And as you can see, they were big. And from down cellar, you can see we've got a pretty big hole that we're going to have to rebuild that wall. So we started building up the wall right along the Celotex, because the Celotex was right tight against the stone rubble wall, and we're using the spray foam as a glue to hold it together, because they have a version of this spray foam for building walls. So this isn't going to be exposed to the sun, so it won't yellow. So we used it as a glue. And here's another shot of it, how we took it down and then build it back up so that it was level. And from down cellar, you can see the wall that we put together. It doesn't look too bad. And once it gets refinished, you'll never know. So then we needed power for the bedroom. So we ran a new wire before we put the floor on. We ran it over and cut a little channel in that sill. And that sill is just about as hard as iron. And here's another shot after we put the crushed stone in. So that's getting ready for the Celotex. And there's a close-up of the little channel that I cut. And you couldn't even drive the staples in straight. They would fold over because my father always called it swamp oak. I don't know what kind of wood it is, but it is nothing but hard. So there, now we're ready for the hardware cloth. And after the hardware cloth, we put down the Celotex insulation. I just didn't get a picture of it. And next, I took the first piece of plywood that we put down on the long wall, pulled it up, cut pocket screw holes, set it back down, and then pocket screwed it into the little short stub floor that's coming under the wall and into, on the other side, into the original floor. And then finally, we turned our attention to the window wall and did the exact same thing with a wider piece. And that is how we took most of the unlevelness, if that's a word, out of the bedroom floor. There's more to be done, but that will be done in a later chapter with concrete. So right now we've got the stone wall cut down, we've got crushed stone into level, we've got the hardware cloth to keep the mice out, we've got the Celotex in for insulation, we've got that air sealed with the spray foam, 3/4 inch plywood down, and pocket screwed in place. And that's going to stay like that until we get around to actually leveling the floor. Because while we've done a lot to level it, there's still more to be done. And you'll see the actual leveling and air sealing of the floor with a very novel way of doing it using a NASA product in the next chapter.